I stepped out of the rideshare, still smelling faintly of sunscreen and salt water, the last traces of the Maldives clinging to my skin, like a dream that hadn't realized it was over. My suitcase wheels bumped against the curb outside Seabreeze Tower, and for a moment I just stood there, breathing in the familiar ocean breeze, thinking about how good it would feel to sink into my own bed again. Then I saw them. 3 movers in navy shirts. One leaning against a dolly, another taping a cardboard box, shut the third wiping sweat from his brow. My boxes. My handwriting on the labels. Every curve of every letter unmistakably mine. I blinked slow and disbelieving. Maybe someone else used the same marker. Maybe a neighbor borrowed my old Sharpie. Maybe I was still jet-lagged and hallucinating. Anything but the truth cracking open inside my chest. Then the tallest mover checked his clipboard and looked at me with mild curiosity, like he was asking for my order at a cafe. "You Madison Hale." My voice barely worked. "Yes." "All right," he said, nodding once. "We were told to clear out your penthouse. New owner gets the keys this afternoon." The street noise fell away. The sunlight dimmed. My pulse stopped, then roared back loud and hot in my ears. New owner. My penthouse. The $2 million place tied to my family trust, my inheritance, my independence, my entire adulthood. My home. Sold. And I was finding out from a stranger holding a clipboard. My phone buzzed. A message from Mom lit up my screen before I could process anything at all. "Don't be dramatic. Chloe needed help. Figure out where to sleep tonight. Homeless girl." Homeless girl. I didn't know cruelty could be typed so casually. I stood there on the sidewalk, the movers, waiting, people walking past, the ocean wind, brushing the back of my neck. The Maldives felt like another lifetime, like it belonged to somebody who still had a place in this city. I swallowed hard. "Could you give me a minute? Take your time," the mover said. "Rough situation, huh?" Rough, if only he knew. I stepped out of the way and dialed my mother. She answered before the first ring finished. "Good," she snapped. "You're there." Saves me the trouble of explaining. My throat tightened. "Mom? What did you do?" "What we had to do," she shot back. "Your sister was drowning, Madison." "Drowning. We saved her. You sold my home." "Oh, please. You don't need a penthouse." Chloe needed stability. Chloe, 28 years old, perpetually irresponsible, chronically addicted to shopping and crypto gambling. Cute chaos in human form, always leaving emotional and financial fires behind her. Fires I'd been putting out since we were kids. "I never agreed to this," I whispered. "Well," Mom said, "that's why we used the power of attorney you signed years ago. The one after your surgery." Ice slid through my chest. That POA was for medical emergencies. Medical, not real estate. "We updated it," she said breezily. "You're welcome." Before I could speak, Dad's voice joined the call, impatient, annoyed. "Madison, listen to your mother. This is for the good of the family, for the good of the—" My voice cracked. "You threw me out of my own home. You'll land on your feet," he said. "You always do." And then, sliding into the call like poison slipping under a door, came Chloe. "Hi, Maddie. You should be thanking us. The sale saved all of us. You'll be fine. You're too young to be tied down anyway. Maybe traveling or living in different neighborhoods will be good for you." Something inside me cracked. Not a break, an awakening. "So you all decided my life didn't matter," I said quietly. "Oh, stop it," Mom snapped. "We know what's best for you." And there it was, their favorite line. Their justification for every boundary crossed, every demand, every manipulative twist of the knife. "You didn't sell what you think you sold," I said. Silence. Confusion. Dad scoffed. "What does that mean?" But I wasn't giving them anything. Not here. Not like this. "You'll find out soon enough," I said. Madison, Chloe tried. I hung up. For a long moment I just stood there, breathing in the salt air, feeling something heavy and sharp settle in my chest. Power. Clarity. Betrayal turning into resolve. I walked back to the movers. Load everything into storage. Please. You got it, the foreman said gently. Family problems, huh? I almost laughed. You have no idea. As they started lifting boxes into the truck, I stepped aside and scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I hadn't tapped in years. Diane Mercer, attorney. My thumb hovered for a second, then I pressed call. She answered immediately. Madison, they sold my penthouse while I was in the Maldives, I said. I need your help. There was a long, simmering pause. Do not speak to them again, Diane said. Not one word. I'm pulling up the trust documents now. We're going to fight this. I finally exhaled. Good, I whispered, because they have no idea what they've started. Later that night, after the movers shut the truck doors, and I watched the place I used to call home fade behind me, I dragged my suitcase through the dim parking lot of a cheap motel on the edge of Port Crescent. The room smelled like bleach and old linens. The walls hummed with distant plumbing. It wasn't home. It wasn't even temporary comfort. It was a holding place between who I'd been and who I was about to become. I set my suitcase down, pulled out my laptop, and opened the secure vault where I kept every important document scanned and stored. Trust paperwork, financial records, old emails. Things Diane once told me to keep just in case. I never imagined just in case would mean this. The trust documents opened on my screen crisp and clear. Lines I hadn't read in years jumped out at me now. Beneficiary Madison Claire Hale. Successor rights not transferable without beneficiary approval. Real estate liquidation requires beneficiary co-signature. I closed my eyes. Air rushed out of me. They never had the authority. Not legally, not morally, not in any universe. A sharp mix of fury and relief twisted inside me. My phone buzzed. Unknown number, call me when you're ready. DM. I didn't hesitate. Madison, Diane said when she answered, I've read the trust. You're safe legally, but this is going to get much worse before it gets better. They can't keep the sale, I said. Right, no, she said firmly. And once I see the closing documents, I'll likely find forged signatures and misrepresentation. Prepare yourself. I swallowed. What do I do tonight, Rest, if you can, she said. And Madison's silence. Let me handle everything. I hung up, closed the laptop, sat on the edge of the stiff motel bed and let the weight of the day settle over me. My parents had mocked me as homeless, but they were wrong. I wasn't homeless. I was preparing for war, and they were the ones about to lose everything. The motel room creaked the moment I shifted my weight on the thin mattress. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, the cheap plaster, stained with shapes that looked like countries on a map I didn't want to travel to. I hadn't slept. Not really. A few minutes here and there, jolting awake each time, as if someone had knocked on my skull from the inside. By sunrise, the air felt stale, heavy, like it was carrying the last pieces of my old life in its lungs. When my phone buzzed again, I didn't move. I already knew the pattern text call text, and always from the same 3 people who had just destroyed my world. The screen lit up bright and insistent Mom, then Dad, then Chloe. I let all 3 roll into silence, each notification adding a new layer to the fog around my thoughts. Finally, the length of the motel room felt too small for my spinning mind. I grabbed my jacket, slipped into my shoes, and stepped outside. The morning air in Port Crescent was cool and sharp, smelling of damp pavement and distant ocean spray. I walked across the lot toward the rideshare, waiting for me sliding into the back seat. The driver looked at me through the rearview mirror, eyes kind. Rough morning, he asked. I forced a weak smile. Something like that. He nodded like he already knew the shape of the kind of heartbreak that clung to me like a second skin. I turned my gaze to the window, watching the town blur by. Past the strip mall where Dad used to take me for ice cream. Past the park where Chloe once faked a sprained ankle to get out of soccer practice. Past so many memories that now felt like lies I'd accidentally believed. My phone buzzed again. A text flashed across the screen. You're being childish. Answer us. Then another. We did nothing wrong. Then, Chloe, stop this, Maddie. Don't make things worse. I took a slow breath and locked the phone. When the rideshare dropped me off outside Diane Mercer's office building, I stood there for a moment, letting the early light settle over my shoulders. My body felt wired exhaustion and adrenaline fighting for dominance. I walked inside the glass building, riding the elevator up to the 4th floor, with nerves humming under my skin. The receptionist barely had time to look up before Diane appeared in the doorway of her conference room. Her slate gray suit was as crisp as her expression. "You look like you slept 2 hours," she said. "I slept 0, I answered. "Good," she said, motioning me inside. "Anger keeps people honest. Sit." I took a seat across from her at the long wooden table. A stack of documents sat in front of her, neater than anything in my life had ever been. "I need you to walk me through everything," she said. "Everything they've ever asked you, for every odd request, every time something felt wrong." But before I could speak, my phone vibrated again. Diane held out her hand. "Let me see." She glanced at the screen, then passed it back. "Don't respond," she said. "Not one word." I placed the phone face down on the table. "Now," she said. "Start from the beginning." So I did. The years of small requests that grew into larger ones, the money I gave for family emergencies, the savings I covered quietly for Chloe when she didn't want to worry Mom and Dad, the arguments where I was always the one told to calm down, the times they said I was too dramatic when I tried to set boundaries. Diane listened, without interrupting, taking notes in smooth, controlled strokes. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. "Madison," she said gently, "this isn't a sudden betrayal. This is a long pattern of financial and emotional exploitation." A heavy knot formed in my throat. "I let them do it." "No," she said firmly. "They conditioned you to believe you owed them. People who use fear and guilt as control rely on that conditioning." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed again, this time with a call. It rang, then rang again, then a text from my mother flashed across the screen. "We need to talk. Stop ignoring us." Another text. "You should be grateful. We saved your sister." Then another. "You owe us for everything we've done for you." My stomach twisted. A decade of buried emotions pressed against my ribs. "Put it away," Diane said. I slid it into my bag. She stood and walked to a whiteboard mounted on the wall. "Here's our position," she said, drawing 3 bullet points. "You own the penthouse through the Hale Family Trust." They had no legal authority. They forged signatures. They lied to buyers. They misrepresented your mental state. I swallowed. "They told strangers I was unstable." "Yes," she said. "That's defamation and misrepresentation. They weaponized the idea that you're dramatic because it's a narrative they built over years." I bit the inside of my cheek, seeing flashes of every argument every time I tried to stand up for myself. I remembered the way Mom's voice would harden instantly, the way Dad would sigh loudly disappointed, the way Chloe would mock. They'd trained me to bend. Not anymore. Before Diane could continue, my phone buzzed again. Against my better judgment, I pulled it out. It was a voice memo. My father's voice filled the room, booming, and clipped. "Madison, stop with the dramatics. You're 32 years old. You can rent a place. Chloe was going to be destroyed if we didn't help. You should have understood that. This is your fault." I pressed stop. The silence afterward was suffocating. Diane exhaled, shaking her head. "Every message they send strengthens our case. Keep saving them." My phone lit up again. Another message. Then another. Then another. It was a flood. "You're selfish. You're ungrateful. You don't care about family. You're tearing us apart. You're embarrassing us. You're trying to ruin Chloe's life." I dropped the phone onto the table, my hands trembling. Diane reached out and steadied my arm. "This is exactly why you should not respond. They are trying to provoke you into saying something they can twist." I nodded, swallowing back the sting behind my eyes. "Now," she said, "tell me what happened after you left the Maldives." I told her everything. The movers, the clipboard, the message calling me homeless. The call where Mom told me she'd updated my medical POA. The tone Chloe used like she was doing me a favor by upending my life. When I finished, Diane walked to her desk and pulled a file from a drawer. "I've reviewed the trust document," she said. "You are the sole legal owner of that penthouse. They had zero authority to sell it. Zero." A slow breath left my lungs. "This will become a fraud case," she said. "But first things first, an emergency injunction to freeze all funds from the sale. They won't get a single cent more." My heart thudded. "And then what?" "Then," she said, "we build a case so airtight they won't be able to breathe." I stared at the table, letting the weight of her words wrap around me. A mix of fear and gratitude swirled in my chest. Before I could respond, my phone vibrated again. A new message from Chloe, short and vicious. "Nice job making everything worse. You're pathetic." I turned the phone off completely. Diane held my gaze. "Madison," she said quietly, "your parents will try every tactic. Guilt, shame, threats, intimidation. They will call you dramatic, ungrateful, selfish. They will claim you're destroying the family." I nodded slowly. "They already have." "Then you must stay steady," she said. "Let me handle the fire." I took a deep breath, letting her words settle. "I can do that." "Good," she said. "Because once I file this injunction, there is no turning back." She gathered the papers, pressing them neatly into a folder. "Go back to the motel. Rest. Do not answer their calls. Tomorrow morning we make our move." I stood, slipping my bag over my shoulder. But as I walked toward the door, my phone buzzed one last time. Even though it was powered off, it must have turned back on from the movement. I checked the screen. A text from Chloe: "Stop this, or you'll regret it." My fingers curled around the phone. "It's starting," I said. Diane nodded. "Let it. You're not the one who should be afraid." I stepped out into the hallway, the weight on my shoulders shifting into something sharper. Something steadier. The old version of me, the one who bent, who softened, who apologized for existing, was gone. I walked out of the building and into the sunlight, the wind whipping off the coast and carrying away the last remnants of the girl my parents had trained me to be. For the first time in my life, I wasn't their daughter scrambling to earn peace. I was a woman preparing for battle. The motel room felt smaller the next morning, like the walls had shrunk overnight and were leaning in to listen to my thoughts. I sat on the edge of the stiff bed with a granola bar half open in my hand, appetite gone, nerves coiling in my stomach. My phone had been powered off since yesterday, but turning it on again felt like lifting a lid off a boiling pot. I wasn't ready for the steam, the stinging heat of their words, their manipulation. So I left it off and grabbed my jacket. The lobby smelled faintly of burnt coffee and old carpet. I stepped outside, letting the cold morning air sting my cheeks awake. The sky was a pale blue, washed out like it wasn't sure it wanted to commit to daylight. I stood on the curb waiting for the rideshare. Diane had sent, trying not to think about the texts waiting behind the black screen of my phone. A white sedan pulled up. I climbed in, buckled up, and stared at my hands. They were trembling not from fear, but from momentum. Something had shifted inside me yesterday. I wasn't sure if I liked the feeling, only that I couldn't go back to how things were. When I reached Diane's office, she was already waiting at the entrance with a stack of documents tucked under her arm, and the kind of expression that said she'd spent half the night working. "Come on," she said, holding the door open. "We've got a full day." Inside the conference room, the long table was covered in printed emails, websites, bank statements, screenshots, timelines. A whiteboard stood nearby with my name at the top underlined twice. Underneath it, 3 points were written: trust. Forged POA. Misrepresentation. "This," Diane said, gesturing toward the board, "is our battlefield." I sat down slowly. "What do you need me to do?" "Tell me everything," she said. Every odd feeling, every red flag, every time they brought up Chloe's debts. I swallowed hard and forced my voice steady. It started about a year ago, so I told her. I told her about the first time Mom tearfully hinted that Chloe was going through something, and Dad followed hours later with a vague request for a small loan to help the family get through a rough month. I told her about the times Chloe texted me with dramatic apologies one day and entitled demands the next. I told her about the holidays where they pulled me aside, whispering that Chloe's stress was fragile and that I shouldn't pressure her about her jobs, her finances, or her responsibilities. I told her about the guilt woven into every conversation, the way my parents framed every request as my duty, the way they said, "You're successful, Madison. You're supposed to take care of family." As if my entire identity existed to compensate for Chloe's reckless decisions. Diane wrote everything down, her eyes scanning each page with surgical focus. When I finished, she said, "Madison, this wasn't sudden. This was a long-term pattern of financial and emotional exploitation." I looked down at my hands. I kept telling myself I was helping them. "No," she said firmly. "They trained you to believe that. There's a difference." I didn't get a chance to reply. My phone shoved deep into my bag, buzzed to life, apparently turning on from the movement. I froze, the sound slicing through the room. Diane lifted an eyebrow. "Answering no," I whispered. "Good." But the buzzing didn't stop. It kept vibrating, a call, then another, then a text tone, then another. I tried to ignore it, but the noise felt like a swarm gathering around me. "Madison," Diane said calmly, "you can silence it, but don't delete anything." I dug into my bag, pulled out the phone, and flipped it face up. The notifications flooded my screen so fast I could hardly process them. "Stop this. Answer us now. We need to talk. You're making a fool of yourself. You're being dramatic again. We did the right thing. Chloe would have died without us. Grow up. Stop acting like a victim. Come home. Explain yourself. Don't embarrass us in front of the lawyer." And then one from Chloe, "Nice try, Maddie. You're not the innocent one here." I locked the phone again with shaking fingers. "Silent," Diane said softly, and slid it away. I obeyed, pushing the phone across the table like it was a live grenade. Diane resumed. "Now, let's talk property. You said something felt off about the sale price." I nodded, grabbing the printed listing I'd emailed her the night before. "The penthouse sold too fast. And for way less than market value." She read the highlighted line. "Cash buyer. No inspection. 48-hour closing. That's not normal, is it?" "It's a red flag," she said. "A huge one." She clicked through documents on her laptop, projecting emails onto the screen. These messages from the realtor mention unusual urgency and pressure from the sellers. She tapped the screen. "We'll need her testimony. We'll subpoena her." My heart thudded. "Subpoena? Yes," Diane said. "This is fraud. Your parents rushed the sale to cover Chloe's debts. That's motive. But the forged signature, that's intent." The door suddenly creaked open, startling me. A tall man with silver hair stepped inside, carrying a thin black case. "This is Dr. Keaton Hale," Diane said. "Forensic document analyst." "Doctor?" Hale nodded politely. "Miss Hale, I've reviewed the scanned signature on your penthouse sale contract, and I asked pulse quickening." He clicked open his case, pulling out 3 magnified images. "Your natural signature is fluid," he said. "Consistent pressure, rapid pen movement." He pointed at the forgery. "This one shows hesitation marks, uneven pressure, tracing lines. And the loop in the H is incorrect. Someone copied your signature slowly." My stomach dropped. "Chloe." Diane didn't have to confirm. I knew it. Chloe learned to copy my handwriting in middle school when she forged Mom's signature on permission slips. I'd laughed back then. Now that skill had sold my life out from under me. "We can testify to forgery with certainty," Dr. Hale said. "This will hold in court." Diane nodded. "Thank you. We'll need your full report by tonight." After he left, Diane turned the screen to another page. "Now, the bank activity." "Bank activity?" I echoed. "Yes," she said. "I pulled preliminary records from your account." She projected a spreadsheet filled with numbers, dates, summaries. My jaw slowly opened. Several withdrawals, small ones, all under $300. "Regular. That's..." Not me, I whispered. No, Diane said. It's them. My hands curled slowly into fists. And this, she said, pointing to another tab, is a transfer to a Nevada online casino under Chloe's email. My breath stalled. How long, I asked. 18 months, Diane replied. 18 months of siphoning. 18 months of theft disguised as love. Then she clicked another tab, another account. My chest tightened. This one, she said carefully, was created using your social security number. I felt the room tilt. What? My voice cracked. It's a shell account. They used it to route money into Chloe's debt payments. Identity theft. My parents had stolen from me in every way a person can be stolen from. I pressed both hands against my eyes. I wasn't crying. I was grounding myself. Because the anger rising inside me felt volcanic. Madison, Diane said gently, your parents will make you feel like you betrayed them. They will accuse you of ruining the family. They will cry and scream and beg. I lowered my hands and looked at her. I'm not backing down, I said. A small smile appeared on her face. Good. Because once I file this injunction tomorrow morning, they will realize they've lost control over you. At that moment, my phone buzzed again, one last text breaking through even on silent. A message from my father. If you do this, you're no daughter of mine. I stared at the words for a long moment. Then I pressed the phone face down on the table. They lost me, I said quietly. Long before I lost the penthouse, Diane gathered the files into her bag, stood, and held out a single sheet of paper. Sign this, she said. It authorizes me to take full legal action on your behalf. After this, they cannot contact you about anything involving the case. My hand trembled only once as I took the pen. Then I signed. When the ink dried, something inside me hardened. Something long overdue. Diane placed the papers back into her folder. Go back to the motel, she said. Rest. Tomorrow everything changes. I walked out of the building, the coastal wind whipping against my face. I pulled my jacket tighter and kept walking, step after steady step, feeling myself transform with every one. They thought they'd broken me, but all they'd done was awaken me. And tomorrow morning they'd learn the difference. The motel walls felt closer when I woke, like the room had inhaled overnight and forgotten to breathe back out. I lay there for a few seconds, staring at the dim glow seeping through the heavy curtains, listening to the hum of the mini-fridge and the distant sound of someone arguing 2 doors down. I didn't want to be here. I didn't want to be anywhere except where my life used to exist, but that place wasn't mine anymore. Not yet. I forced myself up and into the shower, letting the lukewarm water run over my skin, as if it could rinse off the humiliation, the anger, the disbelief. By the time I stepped outside, the coastal air was crisp enough to sting my lungs. I wrapped my coat around myself and walked with purpose toward Diane's office. The rideshare pulled up and I climbed in without speaking. The driver didn't ask questions this time. Maybe it was written on my face, an expression caught somewhere between exhaustion and resolve. As we passed the familiar landmarks of Port Crescent, I felt each one ghost through me. I'd once believed this town was safe. That family, even with its flaws, meant something unshakable. But as the courthouse came into view in the distance, I knew that belief had died the moment I saw movers packing my life into boxes. Diane was already at the entrance, waiting, her dark braid pulled back sharply, her expression intense but calm. You ready? She asked, as she held open the heavy glass door. I think so, I said. You are, she replied firmly. Her office was colder than usual, as if the chill outside had seeped through the walls. The conference table was covered in documents more than yesterday, spread out in precise clusters. A whiteboard had been erased and rewritten this time, holding 3 new phrases. Emergency injunction freeze, all funds establish intent. You didn't sleep, Diane observed as I sat down. I shrugged. Did you? Not even a little, she said. But adrenaline is a great substitute for rest. Before I could respond, her paralegal Mason entered holding a tray of coffee cups and 2 thick files. The lender statements arrived, he said. And the buyers sent over the email chain you requested. Diane flipped open the folder. Perfect. Madison, look at this. She slid the papers across the table. I leaned in and felt my breath catch. They had sent messages to the buyers, telling them I was emotionally unstable, claiming I had a long history of shutting down under legal pressure, saying I refused to participate due to anxiety issues. I read each line twice, the words blurring with disbelief and rage. They made me sound incompetent, I whispered. Diane nodded grimly. It makes the sale easier to force. Buyers don't want complications. They lied about my mental state. They misrepresented the seller, Diane corrected. That's fraud. And it's deliberate. I pressed my thumb into my palm so hard it left a mark. I'd always been the strong one, the dependable one, the one who handled problems quietly so that nobody would feel burdened by me. And my parents had twisted that reliability into a weapon against me. How many people saw this, I asked. Everyone involved in the transaction, Diane said. The buyers, the realtor, the closing attorney. A hollow ache formed in my chest. Let's keep going, she said gently. There's more. Mason projected bank statements onto the screen. The numbers glowed in blue and red. Transfers from your checking account, Diane explained. Small withdrawals. Repetitive. Purposefully kept below reporting thresholds. My heart hammered. Those weren't mine. I know, Diane said. They did this behind your back. She clicked to another tab. This is Chloe's gambling ledger. I froze. What am I looking at? A running total of her crypto gambling losses over the past year. I scanned the numbers and felt the room shift around me. $72,000. That's the conservative estimate. And all this time, I murmured, they told me she just needed help with her credit cards. Diane didn't look surprised. Addicts rarely tell the whole truth. And your parents protected her instead of confronting her. They covered her debt until they couldn't anymore. Then they used the fastest resource available. Me, I said. You, she confirmed. Your home. Your savings. Your identity. A flash of anger filled my chest, hot enough to sting. She could have just asked me. She didn't want to hear the word no, Diane said, voice even. But more importantly, your parents didn't want to admit they'd been enabling her for years. It's easier to sacrifice the stable child than face the chaos of the unstable one. The truth of it hit with the weight of an anvil. I looked at Diane, my voice low. I would have helped. If they'd told me the truth, I would have helped. She held my gaze with a softness she rarely showed. And that, Madison, is exactly why they didn't ask. They didn't want your help with boundaries attached. They wanted full control. Silence settled over the room, a silence filled with years of unspoken truths. You okay? She asked finally. No, I said. But I'm done being quiet. Diane nodded with approval. Good. Because what happens next will not be quiet. She walked to the whiteboard and circled a phrase, intentional fraud. This, she said, is what we prove today. And to do that, we need testimony. A knock sounded outside the room. The door opened slowly, revealing the realtor Olivia Marks, small and nervous, her fingers clutching a folder so tight her knuckles were white. Miss Mercer, she said shakily. I got your message. Come in, Olivia, Diane said. Olivia took a seat, her shoulders trembling. Tell us what happened, Diane said gently. Olivia swallowed, hard, eyes lowering. Your parents, they were intense. They pushed for a rush sale. They said you weren't available. They said contacting you would trigger anxiety. They said you had a history of emotional shutdowns. They told me not to bother you with stressful decisions. My jaw clenched. None of that is true. I know, Olivia said quickly. I mean, I suspected. Your parents they were insistent. They said you'd agreed to everything, but you just didn't want to be involved. They lied, I whispered. Olivia nodded. I saved the emails. I couldn't bring myself to delete them, even though they asked me to. Asked you to, Diane repeated. Or pressured you to, Olivia hesitated. Both. Diane looked at me. I could feel her energy rising, building momentum. Before the conversation could continue, the door opened again. A middle-aged man with a briefcase stepped inside Mr. Collins, the notary. He looked apologetic before he even spoke. "I need to correct something." Diane nodded to a chair. "Sit. Tell us everything." Mr. Collins sank into the seat. "I didn't verify Madison's ID. Your parents told me she had approved everything already. They said she couldn't be there because she was emotionally overwhelmed. I made a terrible judgment call. And Chloe," she signed. The air left my lungs in a slow, controlled exhale. "She forged my signature," I said. "Yes," he murmured. "And I let it happen." Diane closed her binder with a quiet thud. "Thank you for your honesty. You'll need to testify." He nodded stiffly. "I understand." After they both left, Diane turned back to me. "This is bigger than I thought," she whispered. "Forgery, fraud, identity theft, misrepresentation, power of attorney abuse." She paced once, then faced me. "You need to be ready. Your parents are going to unleash hell. They will guilt you. They will scream. They will cry. They will say you're ungrateful, selfish, dramatic, cruel." "I know," I said softly. "They already have." "Then be prepared for worse," she said. "Because once we file this injunction, there is no turning back." I straightened in my chair. My hands no longer shook. "I'm ready," I said. She studied me for a moment, then nodded with pride. "Good. Sign the authorization." I signed. And as I slid the paper back across the table, something in me settled with finality. Diane reached for her coat. "Let's go. We're filing now." I followed her out of the office and down the hallway, each step feeling heavier and lighter at the same time, like shedding the weight of years while picking up the armor for a battle I never asked for. Outside, the wind whipped against my face, colder now, sharper. Diane hailed a cab, holding the door open. "You good?" she asked. I nodded. "Better than I was yesterday." She smiled slightly. "Then you're ready for whatever comes next." As we pulled away from the curb, I looked back once at the office building. It glinted in the morning light, like steel and truth. Tomorrow my parents would learn the cost of forging my name. But today I stopped being the daughter they depended on and became the woman they could no longer destroy. Diane's conference room felt colder than it had the day before, as if the walls themselves understood what we were about to uncover. The glass windows overlooked the Port Crescent harbor fog, rolling in thick enough to blur the line between sea and sky. I stood at the doorway for a moment, taking it in, steadying myself, breathing in the muted gray that matched my mood. When I finally crossed the threshold, two strangers were already seated at the long wooden table. A silver-haired man with a slim leather case sat with perfect posture, hands folded, expression unreadable. Beside him was a woman with smooth, dark hair, pulled into a low bun, her navy blazer crisp and deliberate. Both looked like they'd walked out of a courtroom and into a war room without breaking stride. Diane appeared behind me. "Madison, meet Dr. Keaton Hale, our forensic document examiner, and Patrice Wynn, our financial investigator." I nodded politely, trying not to let my nerves show as Diane motioned me to sit. "Let's begin," she said, closing the glass door. The moment she clicked the remote, the screen at the front of the room lit with a magnified image of my signature, two versions side by side. One fluid and familiar, the other stiff, uneven, wrong. My stomach twisted. The forged signature looked like mine only if someone studied the shape of my name without understanding its movement. It was a costume of my handwriting wearing a mask that didn't fit right. Dr. Hale leaned forward. "This," he said, pointing at the left, "signature is your authentic signature. Notice the natural pen, pressure, the speed, the confidence in the lines." He moved his finger to the right. "This is the one used on the sale contract. See these hesitation marks, the inconsistent slant, the unnatural pauses here, here, and here." He tapped each flaw with the tip of his pen. "This was drawn, not written." My breath caught. "So it's definitely forged." "Absolutely," he said. "There's no doubt." "And one more thing," he pulled out a sheet of paper, placed it beside the forged signature, and slid it toward me. My eyes widened as recognition pierced through me. It was Chloe's handwriting. Her ninth-grade English homework, the loops, the curves, the slight tilt of her lowercase e's. The museum of her immaturity permanently preserved in ink. How did you get this?" I whispered. "Public school records submitted during a scholarship appeal," Patrice said softly. "Your parents included a sample back then. It's public file." My sister's childhood handwriting looked more like the forged signature than my own did. A strange grief hit me, not sadness, but a hollow ache. Chloe had been copying my handwriting since we were kids, scribbling my style on homework, leaving notes pretending to be me. I'd always brushed it off as annoying sibling mimicry. Now it felt like the first sign of something darker. Diane watched me carefully. "Are you all right?" "No," I admitted. "But keep going." Patrice clicked to a new slide. A spreadsheet appeared, columns of dates, amounts, account numbers. My chest tightened when I recognized my own bank account. She spoke evenly, but her voice cut like a scalpel. "Over the past 18 months, withdrawals under $300 were made from your account at irregular but deliberate intervals. These were designed to avoid bank scrutiny." I leaned closer. That's thousands of dollars." 25,000, she corrected. "And all of it routed into your parents' joint account before being sent to this." She clicked again. A new window popped up, Chloe's gambling account. Crypto, digital slot machines, high-risk roulette apps disguised as gaming platforms. A graveyard of bets gone wrong. My pulse pounded. "Oh my God. This isn't the worst of it," she continued. "Your parents then opened a secondary account using your social security number." My heart thudded hard enough to echo in my ears. They stole my identity. Yes. They used it to move funds around banking restrictions. Every transfer has a note attached, "Family emergency." The room blurred for a moment. I pressed my hands into the wooden table to steady myself. Diane stepped closer. "Madison, look at me." I lifted my gaze. "This was not desperation," she said. "This was strategy. A coordinated effort. They exploited you because you were the stable one, the successful one, the one who wouldn't question." A bitter laugh escaped me. "And Chloe? What's her part in this?" She didn't hesitate. She was involved every step of the way. I swallowed the sting in my throat. "Show me." Patrice clicked again. A folder opened with dozens of documents, emails, payment histories, screenshots of overdue notices. She pulled up a summary page. "Chloe owes $70,000, she said. "Mostly gambling, some predatory loans." I felt my body go cold. 70, and rising, Patrice added. "Based on her behavior patterns, she's been chasing losses for over a year." A year! While I'd been paying for her dinners, her new phone, the spa trip she won in a raffle, every time I'd helped thinking I was being the good sister, she'd been digging a deeper hole and dragging my family down with her. Diane stepped closer. "Your parents mortgaged their home twice to cover her debt. When that wasn't enough, they drained your account, and when that wasn't enough, they sold your penthouse." My eyes stung. I wasn't sure if from anger, betrayal, or the brutal clarity of truth. "And they never said a word," I whispered. "They never intended to," Diane said softly. "As long as you were silent and reliable, the cycle worked." Something snapped inside me. A silent break, not a shattering, but a realignment. "I would have helped if they had asked," I murmured. "If they had been honest, I would have helped." "I know," Diane said gently. "That's exactly why they didn't tell you. They didn't want help with rules. They wanted access." I pressed my fingers to my temples, feeling the pressure of years of unbalanced love, uneven expectations, and silent sacrifices. Patrice scanned her notes. "There's more." I exhaled shakily. "Of course there is. The sale price of your penthouse was extremely low," she explained. "Suspiciously so. Your parents insisted on a 48-hour closing and a waived inspection. That's not normal, right? It's indicative of intentional fraud," she said. "Rushing the sale reduces the chance of discovery." Diane folded her arms. "We freeze the funds today. Once the injunction is filed, they can't move anything." I nodded. letting the resolve settle through me. But then my phone buzzed from where it sat on the corner of the table, still face down. I hesitated, then reached for it. One message. From Chloe. Stop this. If you take us to court, you'll regret it. My fingers tightened around the phone. Not fear, not sadness, steady anger. I set it gently back on the table. I'm not stopping, I said. Diane nodded. Good, because this is far from over. She gathered the files. Next step, file the emergency injunction. Then we prepare for the fraud case. I stood, legs shaky but strong enough to hold me. As we walked toward the office exit, I took one last look at the mess of documents on the table. The signatures, the bank statements, the evidence of betrayal crafted over months and years. They thought I'd be too emotional to fight back. But emotion wasn't my weakness. It was my awakening. And the woman walking out of this room was someone my family had never known and could never control again. I drove to my parents' house with a strange calmness layered over the storm building inside me. The neighborhood looked the same as always: trimmed hedges, identical mailboxes, driveways washed clean by last night's rain, houses pretending to be peaceful while families hid their chaos behind closed doors. Ours had always looked picture perfect too, but now that image felt like a costume made of lies. I parked at the curb and sat in the silence for a moment, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Diane's voice echoed in my mind. Stay steady. Don't react. Gather information. Let them expose themselves. I inhaled deeply and stepped out. The front door swung open before I even reached the porch. Dad filled the doorway, his face flushed as if he'd been pacing, waiting, simmering. Get inside, he snapped. I walked past him without a word, the tension heavy enough to feel like gravity was doubling its weight. The entryway smelled like lemon cleaner, a familiar scent suddenly suffocating. Framed family photos lined the hallway, smiling faces frozen in time. But none of those images made sense to me anymore. Every picture felt like a lie, a curated exhibit of a family I now knew had never been real. Mom appeared from the kitchen, her expression a practiced blend of concern and irritation. We need to talk, she said sharply. Chloe sat curled on the couch, arms crossed, legs tucked under her, like she owned the place, like she wasn't sitting in the epicenter of the disaster she'd caused. I didn't move further into the room. I stood near the door, refusing to let them pull me deeper into their territory. What do you want to talk about? I asked. Dad slammed the door shut. What the hell do you think you're doing? Lawyers freezing accounts, trying to ruin us? Have you completely lost your mind? I met his glare evenly. I'm undoing what you did. Mom lifted her chin, voice rising with brittle authority. Madison, sweetheart, you're blowing everything out of proportion. This is family business. You don't drag us into court. You sold my home, I said. We saved your sister. Dad spit back instantly, as if he'd been rehearsing the line. Chloe let out a dramatic groan. Can we skip the lecture? You don't need a penthouse anyway. You live alone. It's selfish for one person to take up that much space. I stared at her. I wasn't even angry, just stunned at the depth of her entitlement. Mom pointed at me. Chloe was drowning. Her debts were suffocating her. We had to step in. You should be thanking us for taking action. By stealing from me, I said quietly. Dad's face darkened. We didn't steal anything. You're our daughter. Family resources support family needs. Family resources. Code for my money, my property, my life. Chloe rolled her eyes. Oh, come on. You've always had more than me. You owe the family something? My voice stayed steady, not loud, not emotional. I forgave your debts 3 times, Chloe. I paid your car loan. I covered your rent when you blew your savings at crypto casinos. I helped you every time you asked. And look where it got us, she snapped. In a crisis because you weren't willing to be flexible one more time. Flexible. They always used that word as if it meant being generous, when what they really meant was sacrificing myself until I had nothing left. I reached into my bag and set a stack of papers on the coffee table. These are the bank statements. Want to explain them? Mom's face blanched. Dad stiffened. Chloe looked away. These, I continued, flipping the first page, are the transfers from my checking account. 18 months of withdrawals, always under $300. Purposefully designed to avoid bank alerts. Mom opened her mouth, but nothing came out. I dropped the next page. These are the transfers to an online gambling platform. Under your email, Chloe. She finally looked up, but her defiance was weaker. It's not what you think. What is it then? I asked. Silence. I pressed the next sheet down. This one. This is a secondary account created using my social security number. You let them steal my identity. Dad barked out a laugh that had no humor in it. You're overreacting. Again, there it was. The word they weaponized against me my entire life. Overreacting. Anytime I questioned them, anytime I challenged them, anytime I stood up for myself, it was always reduced to drama. My hands didn't shake this time. You forged my signature, I said. Mom's eyes snapped up. We did what we had to do. Dad stepped forward. You weren't available. You didn't ask, I said. You would have said no, Chloe shot back. That's my right, I said. It was my home. Mom threw her hands up, voice breaking like she wanted to appear emotional. We didn't have a choice. Chloe was going to lose everything. She was in danger. You know how fragile she is. I stared at my sister, who was currently glaring at me with the energy of someone who hadn't taken responsibility for anything in years. Fragile, I echoed. She forged my name. Chloe's jaw tightened. We all did what we had to do. I felt something settle inside me. Not anger, not sadness, something firmer. Truth. I looked at each of them slowly, deliberately. You all decided my life mattered less. You chose convenience over honesty, control over respect, Chloe's chaos over my stability. Mom stepped forward, reaching out a hand as if she still believed she could smooth this over. Madison, we're your parents. We know what's best for you. I stepped back. No, you know what's easiest for you. Dad's voice rose. Drop this case. Now, before you destroy this family. No, I said simply. You don't have a choice, he hissed. Yes, I said. I do. I pulled out the envelope Diane gave me and placed it on the table. This is notice of legal action, I said. You'll receive copies from the court, but I wanted you to know first. The injunction hearing is today. Mom grabbed the envelope with shaking hands. Madison, don't do this. You'll ruin us. You already ruined yourselves, I said. Chloe stood abruptly, her voice sharp. You're seriously doing this over an apartment? This isn't about the penthouse, I said. It's about betrayal. Dad's face twisted with rage. If you walk out that door, don't come back. I held his gaze. I was never welcome here, unless I was useful. The room went silent. Mom reached for my arm, but I stepped out of reach. Chloe cursed under her breath. Dad muttered something I didn't hear because I was already opening the door, letting cold air rush into the house that once held the illusion of home. I stepped outside, closing the door behind me, sealing the end of something I'd clung to far too long. As I walked down the steps, the crisp morning air tasted cleaner than anything I'd breathed in years. My phone buzzed a message from Diane. Ready when you are. Judge is reviewing the filing. Come quickly, I typed back on my way. Then, I turned one last time toward the house. Not with longing, not with regret, but with closure. They had broken the daughter who tried to protect them, but the woman they created, she was walking to a courthouse, not to surrender, but to fight. And she wasn't afraid of them anymore. The sky over Port Crescent looked bruised that morning, streaked in grays and purples, like the world itself was bracing for a storm. When I stepped out of the rideshare in front of Diane's office, fog was rolling in from the harbor, thick enough to blur the coastline. I pulled my coat tighter around me and paused at the building's entrance. Today wasn't about emotion. It wasn't about pain or betrayal or even anger. Today was about truth, ugly, undeniable, sharpened truth. The kind that cut clean through whatever lies my family thought they'd buried. Inside, Diane's conference room was already lit, and the glass walls flickered with reflections of movement. She stood at the far end, arranging documents across the table, a battlefield of paper and ink. Her jaw was set, her focus razor sharp. She didn't look up when she said, "We have company." The door opened behind me. Realtor Olivia Marks stepped in, her shoulders curled inward, her eyes red-rimmed. She clutched a folder to her chest like it was the last piece of her conscience she'd been holding on to. A much older man followed her, the notary, Mr. Collins, moving with the stiff posture of someone preparing to confess something heavy. "Sit," Diane instructed gently. Olivia sank into a chair, hands trembling as she set the folder down. I didn't know who else to talk to. I'm sorry," her voice cracked. "I'm so sorry." I sat across from her. "You reached out last night." She nodded rapidly. "Yes, I couldn't sleep. I keep replaying everything your mother said to me." She swallowed hard. "And I can't be part of this anymore." "Tell us what you know," Diane said. Olivia opened the folder and slid several printed emails forward. "These are the messages your parents sent me. I saved them, even though they asked me to delete everything after the sale." I picked up the first email. My stomach twisted. From Lillian Hale, subject urgent. "Do not involve Madison," message. "She won't understand. She's emotional and easily overwhelmed. We cannot risk her interfering." I read the next one with numb fingers. From Thomas Hale's, subject sale timeline message. "The sooner we liquidate her property, the better. Chloe's safety depends on this. Madison is unstable. Please don't contact her." "Unstable," I whispered. Olivia nodded, shame tightening her voice. "I believed them at first. They seemed so frantic, and they spoke like they were protecting you." A humorless laugh escaped me. "They weren't protecting me, they were silencing me." Diane leaned forward. "Olivia, did they tell you why they needed a rush sale?" "Yes." Olivia's face flushed. "They said your sister had medical issues, that the family was falling apart financially. They said the trust gave them full authority." "Did you verify that?" Diane asked. "No," she admitted, eyes dropping to the table. "I regret that more than anything." Before I could respond, the notary cleared his throat. Mr. Collins's voice trembled as he spoke. "I need to make a statement as well." Diane nodded, encouraging him. He folded his hands, knuckles pale. "I didn't verify your ID. Your mother said you had approved everything remotely. She said you were too anxious to be present. She urged me to move quickly." I clenched my jaw. "And you believed her?" He closed his eyes. "Yes, and then your father distracted me during the signing. Turned my chair away while the paperwork moved across the table. I only realized I hadn't watched the signature being written when I reviewed the file later. I failed in my duty. And I'm ready to testify to that." Diane's expression didn't soften. She didn't believe in easy absolution, but she nodded. "Thank you. Your honesty will help." Before I could take a breath, Patrice entered the room carrying a thick folder, the same folder she'd hinted at yesterday, the one she claimed would make everything much worse before it gets better. She set it on the table with a thud that sent a cold ripple through my spine. "I've expanded the investigation," she said. "The financial threads run deeper than we thought." She opened the folder. The first page showed 3 account numbers, all hidden, Patrice said, all tied to your parents and Chloe, and each one connected to you. My pulse throbbed. Connected, how she pointed. "This first account is where the small withdrawals from your checking were routed. 18 months of siphoning." The second page. "This is Chloe's gambling wallet, crypto-based, extremely active. The losses are significant, over 70,000. I felt the weight like a physical blow. "And this," she said, tapping the third page, "is the largest problem." She pulled up a bank statement showing my name listed as a secondary contributor to an account I'd never seen. "That's not mine," I said. "No," Patrice said. "Your parents added your name and used your social security number to authorize transfers." Identity theft. Again. Diane's pen clicked loudly in the quiet room. Keep going. Patrice glanced at me with a gentleness I wasn't prepared for. This next part, you should brace yourself. She flipped the page. The header read, Trust Account, Emma Dalton. My heart stopped. Emma, my cousin. She's 16, Patrice said softly. This was her college fund. I stared at the numbers as they burned into me. Balance, $42,000 current. Balance, $0. Recent withdrawals, $18,500. Family emergency, $12,700. Loan support, $10,800. Immediate transfer needed. I pressed a hand to my chest. No, please tell me this isn't. They drained it. Patrice finished quietly. Every last dollar, all transferred to cover Chloe's gambling debts. My vision blurred for a moment. Emma, the sweetest person in the family, the only one who ever treated me like more than a resource. A kid who spent holidays drawing pictures for me, who once told me she wanted to be just like me when she grew up. Her future had been stolen to pay for Chloe's addiction, and my parents had let it happen. Diane inhaled sharply. This changes everything. This isn't just fraud against you. It's fraud against a minor, trust violation on a massive scale. I felt something hollow open inside me, then fill with a slow-burning icy fire. How could they? I whispered. She's a child. Patrice hesitated. Your parents told the bank that you authorized the withdrawals. My breath caught in my throat. They forged my name again. Yes. I closed my eyes, fury pulsing like a heartbeat. Uncle Greg is going to be devastated. He already called, Diane said gently. He received a notice this morning. He will testify, and he wants Emma's college fund restored. A fragile breath escaped me. I'll restore it myself. Every penny. Diane nodded once, as if she'd expected nothing less. The room fell silent until the soft chime of Diane's laptop broke through. She opened an email. Her eyes widened. Madison, she said, you need to listen to this. She pressed play. A voicemail filled the room, my mother's voice sharp and hurried. Olivia, make sure everything is signed before Madison gets back from the Maldives. We can't let her ruin this for Chloe. She'll overreact as usual. Just push it through. She'll thank us later. A faint voice whispered in the background, Chloe's just hurry, Mom. Maddie won't fight us. She never fights. The recording ended. Something inside me went utterly still. I wasn't just a daughter to them. I was a tool, a resource, a silent safety net they never expected to speak. Diane stepped closer. Madison, this voicemail shows intent. Coordination, pressure, deception. This is what wins cases. I took a slow breath. What happens next? We file everything today, she said. Freeze the funds. Subpoena your parents. Subpoena Chloe. Subpoena the realtor and notary. Bring the full truth into the light. But I began. She raised a hand. No, listen to me. They are going to panic. They are going to lash out. They will guilt you, threaten you, claim you ruined them. They will weaponize your love. You must stay silent. I nodded slowly. I can do that. Good, she said. Because once this goes to court, there is no turning back. As if on cue, a new email alert pinged on her laptop. Diane opened it, eyes narrowing. Subject attempted. Transfer flagged as suspicious. Her chair scraped softly as she stood. They're trying to move the money, she said. My pulse hammered. Diane grabbed her coat. We file right now. I stood gathering the documents, my heart sharp and steady. They tried to bury the truth, I said, and now Diane finished. The truth is going to bury them. Rain hammered the windshield as Diane sped through downtown Port Crescent, wipers dragging across the glass in frantic arcs. The storm had rolled in fast, turning the morning into a blur of gray and noise. I sat rigid in the passenger seat, clutching the folder of evidence to my chest like a shield. Diane didn't speak. She didn't need to. The urgency pulsed between us. My parents were trying to move the money. If they succeeded, the injunction would be meaningless. My phone vibrated in my coat pocket. Against my better judgment, I pulled it out. Mom, stop this. We can fix everything if you just come home. Dad, you're embarrassing yourself. Chloe, wow. You're really going to nuke the family over a condo? Pathetic. I locked the screen, jaw tightening. Another buzz came instantly, this time a new number. Don't do this. You'll regret it. Chloe again. She never understood subtlety. I turned the screen face down and stared at the rain. Every drop felt like it was trying to drown out the last of my hesitation. We're almost there, Diane said, turning sharply into the courthouse parking lot. Once this injunction goes through, they won't be able to touch a cent. And if it doesn't, it will, she said flatly. Judge Calder doesn't tolerate nonsense. We stepped into the courthouse entrance, dripping rainwater onto the polished tile floors. Security ushered us through, and the bright fluorescent lights stabbed at my tired eyes. It felt like stepping into another world, one where truth and lies weren't tangled inside a family, but laid out for judgment. As we approached courtroom 4B, voices echoed down the hall. I froze. My parents were already there. Dad stood rigid in a suit he hadn't worn since my grandmother's funeral, face red with fury. Mom's hair was perfectly set, but her expression jagged, like she'd been crying and then furiously denying it. And Chloe leaned against the far wall, arms crossed, trying to look bored but failing miserably. Her eyes were sharp, predatory. Mom spotted me first. Madison, she hissed, stepping forward, we need to talk. No, Diane cut in, stepping between us like a shield. You absolutely do not. Chloe rolled her eyes dramatically. Look at her bodyguard. Cute. Dad glared at me, voice low and venomous. You think you can win this? You think you can destroy us? I think I replied that you destroyed yourselves. The hallway went still. A bailiff opened the door. Case 42FR. 118 Hale versus Hale. All parties inside. We entered. The courtroom was cavernous, lined with wood panels and rows of seats filled with spectators, neighbors, strangers, and a few reporters who smelled blood in the water. Judge Rowan Calder sat behind the bench, silver hair pulled back, expression unreadable, but razor sharp. We rose, then sat. Diane stood tall. Your Honor, we're here to file an emergency injunction preventing the defendants from transferring funds obtained through fraudulent sale. Judge Calder flipped through the documents with quick, decisive movements. Proceed, Miss Mercer. Diane began. Calm. Precise. Surgical. Your Honor, my client's property was sold without her consent. The signature was forged. The power of attorney was misrepresented. The sellers falsely claimed my client was mentally unstable and unavailable. They also attempted to transfer the proceeds as early as this morning. Whispers rippled through the courtroom. Diane continued, her voice unwavering. We request an immediate freeze on all accounts connected to the sale pending a full fraud hearing. Judge Calder nodded, then turned to Brighton, the attorney my parents had hired at the last minute. He looked barely older than me, sweating through his cheap suit, clutching a folder like it might rescue him. He cleared his throat. Your Honor, this is a family misunderstanding. Judge Calder raised a hand. Stop. Is the signature in question authenticated? Brighton hesitated. Well, there may be some irregular, authentic, or forged, the judge repeated, voice slicing like steel. Brighton swallowed. We cannot confirm authenticity. The judge's gaze hardened, so likely forged. My parents stiffened. Chloe's foot tapped rapidly. Brighton tried again. Your Honor, they acted with love. Love does not violate a trust, the judge snapped. Nor does love justify bypassing legal requirements. He shut his mouth. Judge Calder looked directly at Mom, then Dad. Did you attempt to transfer the sale funds this morning? Dad opened his mouth, then closed it. Mom fumbled for a lie but found none. Your Honor, Mom began weakly. Judge Calder didn't give her room. Yes or no? Yes, Mom whispered. The courtroom noise spiked. Even Diane blinked once, surprised they admitted it. Judge Calder tapped her pen. Attempting to hide funds indicates consciousness of guilt. Mom paled. Dad muttered, "This is ridiculous. One more word," the judge warned, "and you'll be removed from this courtroom." He shut up. Chloe slouched deeper into her seat. Diane stepped forward again. "Your Honor, we're simply asking for protection of the assets until the fraud hearing." Judge Calder nodded once, then delivered her ruling. Given the forged signature, misrepresented mental health claims, misuse of a medical power of attorney, and attempted transfer of funds, this court grants the emergency injunction. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. "All accounts related to the sale are hereby frozen effective immediately," she said. "Funds cannot be moved, spent, or transferred until further notice." Mom gasped loudly. Dad slammed his fist against the table before the judge snapped. "Sit down, mister. Hail or I'll hold you in contempt." Chloe muttered something under her breath that sounded like a curse. Judge Calder continued. "A full fraud hearing will be scheduled within the next 3 weeks. Court is adjourned." The gavel cracked. I stood. My parents shot to their feet instantly. Mom stormed toward me first. "Madison, how could you do this? We needed that money." Dad's voice rose. "You ruined everything." "You think you're so righteous," Chloe shoved between them. "You're disgusting, Maddie. You think you look strong. You look insane." I stared at them steady and unshaken. "You forged my name," I said. "You took my home. You lied about my mental health. You stole from Emma. You stole from me." Mom stiffened. "Don't bring Emma into this. You brought her into this when you drained her college fund," I said. Chloe's head snapped toward Mom and Dad, shock breaking through her arrogance. Diane touched my arm. "We're done here." We walked away. I didn't look back. As we stepped outside, the rain eased, thinning into a light mist. The sky was still dark, but no longer violent. Diane exhaled, pushing damp hair behind her ear. "You did well," she said. "I didn't even have to speak." "You didn't need to," she replied. "They exposed themselves." We reached her car. I paused before getting in, staring up at the courthouse. For the first time since the Maldives, I felt a flicker of something bright beneath the wreckage. Not victory, not revenge. Something quieter, stronger. Power. "Told you," Diane said, opening the door. "The judge doesn't tolerate nonsense." I slid into the seat and whispered, "This is only the beginning," and I meant it. The 6 weeks leading up to the fraud trial felt like living inside a pressure chamber every day, a little tighter every night, a little heavier every message from my family, a new attempt to claw their way back into control. Some days I woke furious, other days hollow. But every day without fail, I grew clearer, colder, and more certain of one thing: I wasn't going back to who I used to be. Diane called the transformation emotional fortification. I just called it growing up. The morning of the trial, hearing Port Crescent's skyline was washed in an early winter haze. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, leaving everything tinted in muted blue. The courthouse steps glistened with frost as I climbed them, each breath fogging in the air. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed. People in suits shuffled between hallways. Footsteps echoed against marble floors. And somewhere beyond the double doors, the truth waited. Diane met me outside the courtroom, a coffee in each hand. "Drink," she said. "You'll need it." I gave her a tired smile. "Do I look that bad?" "You look human," she said. "They won't." Her confidence steadied me more than the coffee did. I took a slow breath. "Are they here yet?" "Not yet," she said. "But they will be." She wasn't wrong. Minutes later, the doors at the end of the hall flew open. My mother walked in first, wrapped in a beige coat meant to look dignified. Behind her came my father, jaw set, shoulders tight, eyes darting to every corner like the building itself might attack him. And then Chloe, pale and puffy-eyed, her usual smugness replaced with something fragile and jittery. They looked smaller. Not physically, but in spirit. Like the world had shrunk around them. Mom froze when she saw me. Her voice was a brittle whisper. "Madison, Please. Diane took a half step in front of me. No contact. Dad frowned. You don't get to hide behind her forever. I'm not hiding, I said. I'm protecting myself. Chloe scoffed. You're pathetic. You think this will end well for you. For any of us, I stared at her. It will end truthfully. Before Chloe could retort, the bailiff stepped out. All parties for Hale versus Hale, courtroom 1. We entered. Rows of wooden benches filled with spectators, neighbors, strangers, reporters, whispered among themselves as we took our seats. I felt their eyes on me, but for once the attention didn't make my heart race. It bolstered me. The clerk called order. The judge, a stern woman with steel-gray hair and an expression that could silence a room with a glance, took her seat. Proceed, she said. Diane rose first. Your Honor, our case demonstrates deliberate coordination to defraud my client of her property, her finances, and her legal autonomy. She clicked a remote, the screen behind her lit with the forged signature. Dr. Keaton Hale approached the stand calm as a surgeon. Under magnification, the forged signature became a map of mistakes. Traced, he said. Without question. Next came the notary. I failed to verify identity, he admitted. Her parents pressured me. They distracted me. The courtroom buzzed. Then, Olivia. They told me she was unstable, she said, voice trembling. That contacting her would cause emotional harm. They insisted she'd approved everything, but now I know that wasn't true. Another ripple of whispers. My parents stared straight ahead, faces stiff, masks cracking. Next came Patrice with spreadsheets showing the siphoning, the gambling, the trust violations, including Emma's drained college fund. The judge's eyebrows shot up for the first time. That fund was for a minor, she said sharply. Patrice nodded. And they forged Madison's authorization to drain it. My mother's shoulders shook at that. Not from shame, from fear. When Diane finished presenting evidence, she sat down beside me. Ready, she murmured. I nodded. Then take the stand. I walked up, heart pounding but steady. I placed my hand on the Bible, swearing to tell the truth. The wood of the witness seat felt cold beneath me. Diane approached. Madison, she said, gently. Tell the court what happened the day you returned from the Maldives. So I did. I described the movers holding my boxes. The text calling me homeless. The forged POA. The bank transfers. The voicemail. Chloe's threats. My parents' lies about my mental state. And finally, the moment I realized they had never seen me as a person, only as a resource. When Diane finished, she stepped back. Your witness. Brighton, my parents' attorney, approached me with forced sympathy. Miss Hale, he said, is it possible you're overreacting due to emotional distress? No, I replied. I'm reacting appropriately to being robbed. He blinked. He tried again. Is it possible you misremember signing the updated power of attorney? No, I said. Because I didn't. But memories are not my problem, I cut in. Their actions are. The courtroom erupted in soft murmurs. The judge's lips twitched, almost amused. Brighton tried one last time. Don't you feel any compassion for your sister's struggles? I do, I said. What I don't feel is responsibility for choices I didn't make. There was nothing left for him to say. He sat down, and then it was their turn. My mother walked to the stand, first tears already rolling before she sat. I'm ashamed, she sobbed. But I did it out of love. I didn't want Madison to stress. I didn't want Chloe to be hurt. I thought it was for the best. She looked at me with shaking hands. Sweetheart, I only wanted to protect you. I didn't look away. She wasn't speaking to me, she was performing. The judge's voice cut through her sobbing. Did you forge your daughter's signature? My mother froze. Tears ceased. Her breath hitched. Yes, she whispered. Dad testified next. His voice was harsh, defensive. We're family. Money is family property. We had the right. The judge didn't let him finish. That is not how trusts work, Mr. Hale. Finally, Chloe took the stand. Her tone was brittle, angry, breaking. She always acts better than me, she snapped. She always has everything. And what do I get? Nothing? Nothing except debt and pressure? I didn't think she'd fight us. She never fights. The entire courtroom fell silent. Chloe realized too late what she had admitted. Diane leaned toward me. She just confirmed motive. The judge called a recess. The courtroom emptied around me. I stayed seated, staring at the wood grain in front of me, breathing slowly, steadying myself against a flood of emotions, grief, rage relief, clarity all woven together. Diane sat beside me. You did beautifully, she said softly. I just told the truth, I murmured. That, she replied, is the most powerful thing you could have done. I nodded, eyes fixed on the door through which my family had just walked, faces pale, steps heavy, the weight of their choices catching up with them at last. When the judge returned, her gaze swept the room. Tomorrow, she said, we deliver the verdict. The gavel struck, and everything went still. As Diane and I walked out into the cold afternoon air clouds parting over the courthouse dome, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Hope. Real quiet, dangerous hope. Because for the first time since stepping out of that rideshare, I knew the ending wasn't going to be written by my parents. It was going to be written by me. The morning of the verdict didn't feel real at first. I woke in the motel before dawn, staring at the cracked ceiling while the air conditioner rattled like it was struggling to breathe. The room was dark except for the faint orange glow slipping through the blinds, and for a moment I just lay there listening to my own pulse. Slow, heavy, controlled. Today, everything would be decided: my home, my name, my future, and whatever remained of the illusion I once called a family. I got dressed in silence. My blazer felt stiff across my shoulders like armor that remembered every blow I'd taken these past weeks. I pulled my hair back, applied minimal makeup, and stood before the mirror. My reflection didn't look young anymore. Fragile, uncertain. She looked like someone who had crawled through fire and learned not to fear the flames. Diane picked me up exactly at 7:30. She didn't say good morning. She simply looked at me, nodded once, and unlocked the passenger door. You ready? She asked as I slid in. I have to be. Her lips curved but not into a smile. It was more like recognition. The courthouse parking lot was buzzing when we pulled in. Reporters had gathered near the steps, their breath fogging in the cold morning air. This case wasn't just a family dispute anymore. It was a story: inheritance, betrayal, fraud, emotional abuse, the kind of drama people whispered about at dinner tables. Diane rested a hand on my arm. Ignore them. Walk straight. I did. The moment we stepped inside, my parents turned toward us. Mom looked pale and frayed, around the edges mascara already smudging beneath her eyes, like she'd been crying for hours. Dad's jaw twitched with barely contained anger. Chloe stood between them, arms wrapped tightly around her body, eyes bloodshot from either panic or a long night of pretending none of this was her fault. Mom tried to speak first. Madison, please. No, Diane said firmly. Not today. But my mother ignored her. Sweetheart, we can fix this. The judge hasn't ruled yet. If you withdraw, I'm not withdrawing, I said. Dad stepped forward. You're about to destroy us. You destroyed yourselves, I replied, the words landing like stones in the quiet hallway. Chloe's lip trembled. I could go to jail because of you. No, I said. You could go to jail because of what you did. Before she could respond, the bailiff opened the doors. All parties for Hale versus Hale. Court is now in session. We filed inside. My legs felt strangely steady as I took my seat beside Diane. The room quieted instantly when Judge Rowan Calder stepped onto the bench. Her expression revealed nothing: no sympathy, no anger, no bias, just unmovable authority. We rose, then sat. The judge turned toward the jury. Has the jury reached a verdict? The forewoman, a middle-aged woman with glasses perched low on her nose, stood. We have, Your Honor. My heart hammered once hard enough to echo in my ribs. The forewoman unfolded the slip of paper. In the matter of fraud, she read, we find in favor of the plaintiff Madison Hale. A soft gasp rippled through the room. Mom's hand flew to her mouth. Dad exhaled sharply, a sound between a growl and defeat. Chloe stared at the floor. The forewoman continued. In the matter of forgery, we find in favor of the plaintiff. In the matter of misuse of power of attorney, we find in favor of the plaintiff. My pulse roared in my ears. And in the matter of intentional infliction of emotional distress, we find in favor of the plaintiff. Silence filled the courtroom, thick electric final. Judge Calder nodded. Thank you. Please be seated. Mom whispered something incoherent beside my father, something desperate. Chloe's shoulders shook with rage or fear. Maybe both. The judge turned her attention to them. This court finds overwhelming evidence of deliberate coordinated fraud committed by the defendants Lillian Hale, Thomas Hale, and Chloe Hale. This includes the forging of Miss Hale's signature, misrepresentation of her mental state, exploitation of a medical power of attorney, identity theft, siphoning of funds, and the unlawful sale of a property belonging solely to the plaintiff. She glanced at me briefly, then continued. The sale of the penthouse located at 1 Seaview Plaza is hereby declared null and void. Ownership is restored to Miss Hale effective immediately. I closed my eyes for one long, steady breath. Home. I had my home back. The judge wasn't done. Additionally, she said the defendants are ordered to return all funds taken from Miss Hale, including those siphoned over the past 18 months, as well as the entirety of the proceeds from the illegal sale. My mother let out a strangled cry. My father's face turned red with humiliation. And Chloe looked like someone who had finally seen herself clearly for the first time and couldn't stand the reflection. Judge Calder continued. The defendants are further ordered to pay $100,000 in damages for emotional harm, legal fees, and loss of use. Dad shot to his feet. We don't have that kind of money, the judge said sharply. Or you will be escorted out. He sat. Judge Calder's tone softened only slightly as she looked at me. Miss Hale, I hope this verdict brings you closure and the ability to rebuild your life without interference. I nodded, my voice catching. Thank you, Your Honor. She struck the gavel. Court is adjourned. The room exploded into noise. Mom stumbled toward me, tears streaming. Madison, you can't do this. We'll lose the house. Will? I held up my hand. Stop. Her sob died in her throat. You did this, I said quietly. Not me. Chloe approached, next voice shaking. I'll go to prison. You're letting your sister go to prison. You let me lose my home, I said. You let Emma lose her college fund. Actions have consequences, even for you. She recoiled like I'd slapped her. Dad didn't speak. He simply stared at me with something like hatred. Or maybe it was envy. Or maybe it was finally seeing the daughter he couldn't control. Diane touched my shoulder. Let's go. We walked out of the courtroom, cameras flashing as we descended the courthouse steps into the crisp morning air. Reporters shouted questions, but their voices blurred into background noise. All I could hear was the quiet beat of my own heart, steady and strong. In the car, Diane finally spoke. How do you feel? I looked out the window at the city I'd thought I'd lost. I feel, I said slowly, like I finally got my life back. She nodded. You earned it. I rested my forehead against the cool glass, letting the victory settle into my bones. But beneath the relief, beneath the justice, beneath the freedom, there was a deeper truth I hadn't expected. Winning didn't feel like revenge. It felt like rebirth. And for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of whatever came next. Because whoever I used to be, the daughter who apologized, who sacrificed, who stayed silent, she was gone. In her place stood someone new, someone whole, someone unbreakable. The morning air felt different 2 days after the verdict, clearer, quieter, as if the world had finally stopped pressing its weight against my lungs. I stood on the sidewalk outside 1 Seaview Plaza, with a single key in my palm. My key. My penthouse key. The metal felt heavier than I remembered, but maybe that was because of everything it now represented: loss, betrayal, justice, and something softer beneath it all: belonging. A moving truck idled at the curb exhaust, curling into the crisp air. The same company that had hauled my life away 6 weeks ago was now returning it. The foreman recognized me. "Miss Hale," he said with a kind smile. "Looks like today's a better day." "It is," I replied. "Much better." He nodded and began directing his team with practiced efficiency while I walked toward the lobby doors. The building smelled like citrus and polished granite. Familiar, calming. The elevator chimed its doors, gliding open as if welcoming me back. When I stepped into the penthouse, the view hit me like a soft punch. The ocean stretched endlessly beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, waves catching the morning light in shimmers of silver. The space was empty for now, just sunlight, quiet, and the faint echo of who I used to be. I breathed it in slowly. Home. Not the kind defined by blood or obligation. The kind defined by survival, by rebuilding, by choosing myself for once. The movers arrived minutes later, carrying boxes labeled with my handwriting. Seeing them again, those boxes I'd last seen on the sidewalk while my mother texted homeless girl, sent a pulse of emotion through me. Not pain, not grief, something like pride. I helped the crew organize the boxes, telling them where to set the furniture, the rugs. My grandmother's quilted wall piece, the reading chair lamp I'd bought after my first real promotion. As each item returned to its place, the emptiness inside the penthouse shrank, replaced with pieces of the life I had built, earned, and nearly lost. By noon, the last box was unpacked. The crew left offering congratulations. I stood alone again this time, surrounded by the familiar, my books on the shelves, my blue sofa, the ceramic vase I'd brought back from a trip to Santa Monica. Then my phone buzzed. A text from Rachel, my cousin Emma's mother. "The kids are asking about you. They want to see your new place." A small warmth bloomed in my chest. Emma, who had hugged me so tightly the last time I saw her, she nearly knocked me over. A 16-year-old girl whose entire college future had been stolen by my parents' greed, then restored because I refused to let their theft define her. "Next weekend," I replied. "Tell them I'll bake something." I slipped the phone back into my pocket and walked across the living room to the balcony. The coastal wind wrapped around me in a gentle embrace as I leaned on the railing, watching the ocean shift from gray to deep blue. My phone buzzed again. This time a long message from my mother. "I hope you're okay. No anger, no guilt-tripping, no dramatic accusations, just 4 words, 4 fragile, too-late words." I stared at them for a long moment, then turned off the screen. I wasn't ready. Some wounds needed time. Some needed distance. Some might never close. And that was okay. I no longer needed her validation to breathe. I spent the rest of the afternoon unpacking. I hung the wall art I loved. I arranged my cookbooks by color the way I used to. I placed a small succulent on the windowsill near the coffee maker. My therapist once said it was good to keep something alive near places where you build routine. Every step felt like reclaiming something stolen. Around dusk, the sky turned a soft rose gold. The penthouse filled with warm light stretching across the floors like a quiet blessing. I made myself tea and settled into my reading nook, a space I'd always loved, but now felt entirely new. As I sipped, memories flickered through me. My mother laughing in the kitchen years ago. My father teaching me to ride a bike. Chloe and I building pillow forts as kids. I let those versions of them live in my mind for a moment longer. Then I let them go. The family I thought I had was gone. The family they truly were had revealed itself. And somewhere between those truths, I was finding my way forward. My phone lit up with a new notification. This time not from family. It was from Diane. Just checking in. "How's the place?" I snapped a photo of the living room with its warm evening glow and texted it back. "It feels like mine again." A moment later, she replied, "As it should." I placed the phone down and curled deeper into the blanket draped over my legs. Outside, the stars began to flicker awake across the darkening sky, each one appearing like a quiet promise. I closed my eyes and breathed in the peace of the moment, the kind of peace I hadn't felt since before the Maldives, before the movers, before the betrayal. For a long time I believed justice would feel like revenge, loud and fierce. Instead, it felt like this. Quiet, steady, a reclaimed breath. When I opened my eyes again, I pressed a hand to the armrest of my chair, grounding myself in the present, and whispered into the silent room, I'm home. Not the home they tried to take, the home I fought for, the home I chose, my home. And in that moment I knew the fight had been worth every scar. The first weekend back in my penthouse, I woke to sunlight warming my face instead of the rattle of a motel air conditioner. It felt strange, almost indulgent, to lie in a bed I'd once taken for granted. I stretched slowly, listening to the ocean outside the windows, the soft hush of waves rolling against the shore. For months I'd slept like prey, waiting for the next blow, the next lie, the next betrayal. Now I slept like myself. I made coffee in my kitchen breathing in the scent as if it were the first time I'd ever smelled it. I wrapped my fingers around the mug and watched the city wake up from my balcony, the sun rising over Port Crescent like a promise. I hadn't heard from my parents since the verdict, except for that one message from my mother. I hadn't responded. Not out of spite, but out of self-preservation. Healing sometimes meant silence, sometimes distance, sometimes choosing not to reopen doors that were better left closed. Still, even in the quiet, my mind replayed everything. The trial, the evidence, Chloe's voice cracking on the stand, my mother's tears, my father's rage. Those memories would take time to settle. But each day they seemed a little farther away, like storm clouds drifting off to a horizon that was no longer mine to worry about. That afternoon, the doorbell rang. When I opened it, my cousin Emma practically launched herself into my arms. Maddie. I hugged her tightly, feeling her small frame shake with excitement. She smelled like citrus shampoo, the same she'd used since she was a kid. Rachel and her 2 younger boys stood behind her, smiling warmly. We brought muffins, Rachel said. Emma insisted on baking them herself. I laughed. I'm honored. Come in. For the next hour, the penthouse buzzed with life. The boys ran from room to room, squealing about the view and arguing over who got the bigger muffin. Emma set the tray on the counter and beamed as she looked around. It's even prettier than I remembered, she said softly. I reached over and squeezed her hand. It's yours to hang out in whenever you like. Her smile wavered for a moment, then steadied. Mom told me, what happened with my college fund? I felt my chest tighten. Emma, I'm sorry. None of that should have touched you. You didn't deserve it. She shook her head. It's not your fault, but thank you for fixing it. Mom said the money was already replaced. It was, I said. Fully. With interest. She laughed through a sniffle. You didn't have to do that. I met her eyes. Yes, I did. In her expression, I saw what family was supposed to look like: trust, gratitude, connection. Not obligation or manipulation, not fear or guilt, just love. As evening approached, Rachel gathered the kids. We'll let you rest, but we want you over for dinner soon. I'd love that, I said. When the door closed behind them, the penthouse grew quiet again. But it wasn't the lonely quiet of 6 weeks in a motel room. It was peaceful, spacious, mine. I walked to the sofa and sat down, letting my mind wander through everything that had changed. My parents had always been the sun. I orbited their approval, their expectations, their disappointment shaping every decision I made. I'd given up more pieces of myself than I ever realized, just trying to keep the peace. But standing up to them hadn't shattered me. It had rebuilt me. Later that night, as the sky turned indigo and the city lights flickered on, I brewed chamomile tea and curled into my reading nook. The one place that had always felt safe. The place they'd tried to take. The place I had fought my way back into. The ocean outside roared softly as if the world were exhaling with me. My phone buzzed. This time, it wasn't my mother. It was Diane. "How are you settling in?" I texted back a picture of the ocean view. "Then, better than ever," she replied. "Good. You earned peace." I set the phone aside and leaned back, letting that truth sink in. I had earned peace. Not because of what I won in court, but because of who I became in the process. Someone who didn't shrink to make others comfortable. Someone who didn't confuse love with sacrifice. Someone who didn't equate silence with harmony. Someone who finally understood that family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by behavior, by actions, by respect, and by the courage it takes to choose yourself even when it means walking alone for a while. As I sat there watching the last streaks of daylight fade, I realized something that made my throat tighten. A thought so simple it almost hurt. I wasn't afraid anymore. Not of losing them, not of disappointing them, not of being on my own. Because I'd learned I wasn't on my own at all. I had people who cared. I had a home that reflected my strength. And I had a future that was finally mine. Not bought, not stolen, not dictated, mine. I closed my eyes and whispered to myself the words I wished I had said years ago. I'm enough. The kind of enough that doesn't need permission to exist. The kind that stands tall even after everything collapses. The kind that rises. Before heading to bed, I opened the balcony doors one last time. The city lights shimmered across the water. Somewhere in the distance, a boat horn echoed. Tomorrow would be quiet. And the day after that, and all the days after, even if challenges came, even if old wounds resurfaced, would be days I faced with strength I once didn't know I had. But tonight I was home, truly, finally home. If you've stayed with me all the way to this point, thank you. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever had to stand up to someone you cared about? Have you ever had to reclaim something that should have never been taken from you? Share your story in the comments. And if this journey resonated with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay with the channel. There are more stories ahead, stories of justice, resilience, and the kind of revenge that isn't petty but powerful. I'll be here ready to tell them.